And, and, and,
Welcome to Launch Today, the podcast focused on what it takes to get your new business to $1 million in revenue, from marketing tactics to incredible guest interviews. We focus on sharing behind-the-scenes insight from masters in their field. If you want to grow your revenue for your startup or your business, you don't want to miss today, because today's guest is on a quest. He has a vision how to change how your business talks about itself. Today we're joined by Christoph Haase, a master of narrative and brand transformation at Otherstate. He's not just a founder, he's a reality facilitator who crafts compelling stories for startups looking to make a mark in their industries. With a career that spans over 2 decades, Christoph has honed his skills in challenging the status quo and reshaping business narratives. Whether you're looking to launch, pivot, or rebrand, Christoph's approach to blending story with strategy is designed to turn visions into reality. Let's dive into the mind of someone who believes narrative is the code to program reality. Christoph, welcome to Launch Today.
Wow. I have never had an introduction like this. So good to see you, Trevor. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. We met, I think Lunch Club a while back. I think it was a Lunch Club. I doubt it was in person because you're in Malaga.
Somewhere on LinkedIn. Don't ask me when and where. Somewhere there.
Been a while. For a while anyway. And one of the things I love about what you do is you've got this really interesting approach to the story we tell ourselves about ourselves defines our reality, which I do think is true at the personal level. And my consideration of applying at the brand level was never really something I was doing. So getting to talk to somebody who takes that perception is reality and our self-story will be our reality is super interesting. Talk to me a bit about how narrative and that self-reality reshapes business and how you help startups craft that story to reshape their reality.
Sure. It sounds a little when you put it like that, right? But if you ask me to explain what I do in a businessy way, then it's more like along the lines of I help startups create their brand strategy and their go-to-market plan with a productized service. So this is like the easiest, quickest way to do it. But you're right. The underlying idea, the undercurrent is that we are creating reality. And this is not anything woo-woo at all. Let me try to explain it as quickly as I can. In principle, there's 2 realities. There is, call it 2 truths. There's social truth and technical truth. And a technical truth is, for instance, Balaji had a few interesting examples. This is basically something like the diameter of a virus or gravity, things that just are nature, physics. We can't really do anything about that. Maybe we could, but that's a different podcast. This is a different topic. And then on the other side, there are social truths. And a social truth is basically everything that is man-made, anything that you can think of. So the computer that you're using right now, the books behind you on your shelf, if they are real books, but they do look real. No, I trust you. I believe you. So very impressive. Anything, any service, any tool, any product is something that is man-made. And if you trace it back to its origin, then it always starts out with an idea, with someone saying, this should be done. This is a good idea. And if you reverse engineer this, then you can basically reverse engineer it to the place where this idea starts and where you start spreading this idea, telling people about this idea, influencing people with this idea. And if people flock to it, if people like it, then they will react to it in a certain way. If they react to it, this will create an action, and this action creates a reality, a very small, tiny reality, but it changes the state of the reality that was before. And it's basically the underlying idea. And even if it sounds a little woo-woo to, especially this is how it's done business types, if you look at it that way, then something like telling your story is all of a sudden the most powerful tool you can use.
That's a very good point. I tell my children, I have young children, I tell them, whether you tell yourself you can do it or you can't, you're probably right.
Exactly.
That self story you talk about is what's going to set the agenda for what you wish to tackle. And early stage founders, like no company has a default reason to exist. They only exist because the founders dreamed it into being, which again, this sounds woo, but the founders had an unshakable belief that this thing needed to happen, and they built it, and it did. IBM, NVIDIA, Tesla, Microsoft, General Electric, any of them. At one point, it was a guy sitting in his boxer shorts being like, I'm unhappy with the way things are. We should build something different. And then we got to there, where that reality happened because someone dreamed. So that's why I think is so interesting about the way you talk about narrative.
But that's exactly right. That's the way you create reality. And at the end of the day, you have a Tesla. And it's not just the self story you're telling yourself, because so we're talking about telling stories to other people today, or branding, or visual identities. All of those things are parts of storytelling. And this is all of these elements you can use, you can them. So you can best influence a certain type of person with it. And if that person reacts to this, then they do something. They start an action, and that action then creates something. And that is basically the purpose of go on LinkedIn or wherever you want. Everyone talks about storytelling or branding or visual identities or all this stuff. But to me, this is all part of the same thing. And at the end of the day, outside of the business world, it's creating realities. And for startups, it is literally creating new economic realities.
Yeah. It's hard, right? And we both approach it from a different lens. I do, if you follow my podcast and you follow me on socials, you probably know minimum viable sprints, go-to-market campaigns. That's how I tackle this, is from a very numbers-driven, if you just are bad for long enough, eventually you'll be good.
Mm-hmm.
But you take a different approach, and I'm not saying that either of our approaches is the only way. Talk to me about, as you're working with a startup and you help them articulate their brand story, what challenges do they come into and how do you help them overcome them?
Let me just, nice business word here. Let's circle back to what you just said. I don't think we're actually doing something entirely different. I think we're just using a different way of doing the same thing. And so I'm not sure how entirely, you work in detail, but I'm assuming if you run experiments, you create some sort of a minimum viable creative, let's call it that way, and you put it in front of people and people react to that. And then depending on which creative generates the best reaction, you then double down on that and then maybe A/B test this and then go down that road. So that is essentially what that is. You're trying to create tiny realities with creatives that you put in front of people to basically touch their hearts and minds with what you're doing, and then they do something in return, and that creates those realities. And we don't have to linger on those realities for too long, but that's literally the same that I'm doing, just with different tools and in a different format, and then with a different goal in mind. But yours is just a different step on the way of making these things real.
When you're advising people through how you tackle this, turning a vision into reality, what's the common obstacle that you see founders have to being able to shift their mind and say, oh, you're right, my branding, it could be here, it is here. How do you get them across that leap?
So what I'm doing with Otherstate is starting even earlier. They might already have a branding, or they might have a website out there or whatnot. But the common denominator with many founders, at least, is that they early founders, especially talking about early stage founders or products that are in an early stage, they are not really clear on what they are actually doing or what they want to do or where they want to go or who they need to talk to, who they need to address, what's their market, what exactly is their competitive landscape, their competitors, are the companies or products that they think they are competing with really their competitors, or is there a wider field of other industries or markets that might be stealing the attention of the person that you actually want to talk to? So getting really clear on what it is that you're doing and for whom and why is where Otherstate sets in. So I was asked the other day, what's the number one benefit you get from it? And it, as unsexy as it sounds, is clarity. And clarity then leads to, if you really understand what you're doing, if you're really clear about your approach, about your product, about your market, about your audience, that leads to a few downstream benefits, if you will. One of them is speed. You're a lot faster going to market, addressing those people, talking to them. You're a lot clearer, a lot more precise, because it's a lot easier to choose the right words to get in contact with them, to talk to them. It is a lot easier to design, for instance, creatives that what you do. It's a lot easier to design a brand or a website or write copy. And another thing that is a byproduct, and especially for founders, and both you and I are founders too, is a certain confidence that you are on the right path. You are on some path that is really clear to you. And if you're going down that path and you hit an obstacle that you didn't see coming, then you at least know how and where to adjust. And that's basically how you could sum it up.
Yeah, I think vision and clarity are, if you think of like your day to day, is you're looking down at your feet to pick the next step that you're taking. And then your 5-year goal is what's way up there on the mountaintop or way out there on the horizon. And as long as you keep moving towards that point, you're going to deviate around obstacles or over them or under them or whatever preposition we wish to use. But you're still making progress towards the same thing. And when you have that clarity for everyone on your team, you are all going the same direction. Mm-hmm. And that importance of clarity is everyone knows we're going this way. You don't have someone trying to pull the cart that way. And you're like, what are you doing? We're all over here.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Team is another important aspect where if you have that clarity and you have, for instance, as you mentioned, that vision, that North Star that's pulling you towards itself, where you always, even if you're in a slump and you don't want to get up the next morning, or you have a couple of customers that left, and
I've been there. Right?
Yeah, we all have. And we get there again and at some point. And but you know that behind that next obstacle, there's still this thing that you're going towards. So this pulls you towards it. But then also, since you mentioned team, it not just helps everyone on the team do the same thing, but it also helps you choose the right people for your team. Because if they are aligned with what you can tell them about your company, about where you're going, then it makes it easier for you to decide, do I want this guy on my team? And it also makes it easier for those people to decide, do I want to be on this guy's journey? Because I don't know, if I don't know where he's going, then I might be in for the ride, for the money for a while, if it's okay, if it's nice, if it pays the bills, but then I might be off. And especially for early startups, it's not always the money, right? It's not, you don't make big bucks usually when you start working at an early startup. You get some shares of something that you hope is going to become something. If you can, if where this something is going makes sense to you and you believe in this, then it is a lot easier to give it your all and come in every morning and do whatever the thing is that you need to be doing to move forward.
Yeah, definitely. I'm wearing their shirt today. This is a shirt I designed for the last startup I was an employee of.
Dream. I like that.
This is the company was Unito, but we raised our seed round. So we were dreaming this thing into existence together. And the first 5 months I worked there, I lost money every month. They weren't paying me enough to cover my bills. And I moved from Poland to Montreal to come work for them, and I lost money every month. But I thought the team was interesting enough and the problem was interesting enough that I was like, let's go. That'll get you people like that, right? I think
Yeah.
as a founder, right, and as I mentioned, you and I are both founders, right? You came up with Otherstate, and if our names and our story we tell is all defining reality, what is an other state? What is the reality you are building?
I don't know about you, but I've been around for long enough to see what's been going on in my immediate reality and what I perceive from the outside world reality for quite a few decades. And over the last few years, especially, let's say maybe 10, 15 years, but at least the last 5 years or so, it's been getting crazier and crazier. And I don't even know where to start when you would ask me, what exactly do you mean? Look at politics, look at wars, look at, like anything that's going on. And it's what the fuck? And can I say this on your podcast? You can bleep it out.
Go crazy.
And like even with my wife, whatever pops up on X or on LinkedIn or on any other platform where I gather my information, my news, there's so many what the fuck moments now that I've lost count. And what I'm seeing is a certain pattern, and a pattern that I've also experienced in my own personal life in my previous career, which was running our family business, which is a engineering and manufacturing company for industrial electronics. And I did that I worked there for about years, and about 5 years of those 15 years, I tried to transform this, at the time, 50-year-old dinosaur with about 100 people working there into the company of the future. And the company of the future was a concept of how companies could work and function in the future, and what technologies we would use and what markets to go into. And it was turning it into a real-time business laboratory, if you will. And this worked all fine and well until a certain point in time when I realized had to realize the hard way that the family part and family business doesn't always work as well as you had hoped. And I had to move on. I had to let that go. One thing I took from this is that I experienced this pattern that I'm seeing out in the world now, among many other patterns, but that's the one I picked for myself, is that there is a certain elderly elite that is actively suffocating change against the needs and wants of future generations.
Screw you.
Yeah. I'm just going to sit on this because for me it works, and too bad for you. And I personally think this is mainly a boomer problem. There's probably other opinions out there as well, but let's just call it elderly elites are waging a war against the needs and wants of future generations, against the needs and wants of your children, my children. I got 3 of my own. And Otherstate is, since this was the question, why Otherstate? Otherstate is my attempt to help as many startups, young founders, early founders, spawn as many startups into the world as possible to help the decline of the old people's economy. And Otherstate is a tool that is built for that and will hopefully be as effective as possible.
Okay.
And that's why creating other states, that is a other state, that it's another state, a new state, and that's why it's called Otherstate.
Gotcha. Okay. So let me ask you then, with the other state mindset. So I do teach a fair bit of brand positioning, not the visual side, but like the narrative side. I have a couple of activities I drive people through. One of them is imagine what year is this, 2024? Imagine your 2029 Twitter bio, right? That's one of them. Or whatever. Force people into these kind of constricted rules to think about what the story you want to tell yourself is.
Mhm.
When you're working with a startup, give me an example of, hey, do this to help you reframe some of how you talk about yourself to help make your vision real. What's an exercise you would tell someone to do?
Let me try to just, in principle, explain how Otherstate works, opposed to other options that are out there or ways how you do it. In a very like a simple way, you can, if you start at the end, at the headline of your landing page or the market slide copy of your pitch deck, or the team description on the brief for your brand designer, if you start at this end product and you look at the information that's packaged in there, you can deconstruct this into certain building blocks. So go one step back and you end up with things like a value proposition or a benefit statement or a vision or a mission or persona, for instance. So all these marketing building blocks that people do. And then if you deconstruct those into its constituents, then you end up with a question, a very precise question that will lead you to an expected answer. And that expected answer you can then put together in a building block, and you can use those building blocks to then come up with copy or with headlines, with descriptions, with ad creative, stuff like that. So the principle of Otherstate is that you answer simple questions about your project, about your product, about your company, and those answers to those questions are then taken in the background. So this is all, I should probably preface this with this. This is not face-to-face. This is you can imagine it as being a SaaS product where you go on the website, you log on, and you have a conversation with a bot. Not an AI bot, but a bot that is programmed with questions and lead ups to those questions and little helpers in between to help you understand what the answer is that we're looking for. And so you have this conversation with the chatbot, your answers get collected in the background. Those answers are then put together. Right now, I'm doing this mostly manually into raw building blocks that you can use for your marketing, like a vision, mission, persona, value proposition, all this stuff. And in the next step, those building blocks are then used to pre-fill asset templates, like a standardized landing page / website, a pitch deck, designer brief, business model canvas. So it is basically a detailed brand strategy go-to-market plan that takes bits and pieces from what you have in your head about your product, about your company, and puts them together in a way that you can then use it to create your assets. So it basically takes you from 0 to 80%, and then you refine it. And since the question was about what exercises specifically, so the exercises are not as obvious as you just mentioned. It's basically you just go through these questions in certain modules, and the questions are just in a way and structured in a way that you think about the answers in a certain way. And then the structure doesn't really come with the exercise. It's more like a conversation. The structure really comes in the output where you get those different building blocks.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
I do think so. You talked a bit about this kind of future casting, right? And then working your way back. And there are, if you're a founder, you're listening to this, one, go check out Otherstate, because I've used the chatbot. It's pretty cool. But two is, if you're trying to think of how this applies, like in the real world, Tim Ferriss has a great question he likes to ask that I think really helps distill big business problems. if this were easy, what would it look like?
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And then I like that. And then I like to add into that the Kaizen 5 whys. Because it's one thing to say, if this was easy, if my life were easy, what would it look like? My agency would be generating $3 to $5 million a year. I'd be working 4 hours a day to make it happen. Okay, cool. Why is it working this way, right? How did you get to that? You ask and you dive into the deep questions from there, and then you've now built yourself a roadmap. You can work back from there.
Exactly. But this is an important point that you, sorry for interrupting you there, but this is really important that if you ask those big questions, and this is usually what you find on the internet. So what I'm doing with Otherstate is there's no magic to it. This is like everyone can do this by themselves. You can go on the internet and just find a worksheet for a persona or how to get your vision and start thinking about it, start working on it. And you can get you get this clarity and you can build those building blocks for yourself. But one of the difficult things I find is usually that you have to answer big questions. If someone has ever worked with an agency on their brand identity is a good example, for instance. And usually if you do this and you work with a freelancer or an agency, if they're worth their salt, they will put you through some sort of a strategy program first. And the smallest version of this strategy program that you're usually facing is some sort of a sheet where they ask you questions like, what's your vision? Or who is your audience? And those are big questions that sound simple, but they are super deep, and it's super difficult to answer them. And you can answer them quickly, but then you're not precise and you will not get the result in the product that you're trying to buy from this agency. It's gonna get difficult. So you need some precision in the approach. So like you just mentioned, if you have a big question like this, then you have to pluck it apart, figure out what the hell does that actually mean. And when you start thinking about what does that really mean, then it gets really detailed and really complicated really quickly.
I get that. So nobody has unique thought, right? We all stand on the shoulders of other people who had other thoughts that were interesting before us, and then we've refined and taken them from there. What's a book or an author or a person or somebody who you draw inspiration from that you can say to any founder out there, hey, of course, go listen to me, but also go listen to these people too?
Oh, man. No, you got...
On the positioning side, like I really like April Dunford with Obviously Awesome is a really good book. A lot of what I do is a systemization around the kind of things that April Dunford talks about, just as an example.
So there's almost so many that I wouldn't know where to start. Number one. Number two, if I see you on the street, I will remember you in 100 years from now. If you would ask me your name, I'm not sure I would. So if you ask me,
same thing. I'm terrible with names, but I'm pretty good with faces.
So if you ask me for one author, then I would say read some Bukowski. But that has nothing to do with business.
He's the visual guy, though. He's all about the really striking visuals. Right?
Well, no, Bukowski is like and this has nothing. This is poetry and fiction and whatnot. And every one of his books is just like about drinking and just like bumming out. And so it has nothing to do with business. It's just the first thing that came to my mind.
Bukowski.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, I had a guy, what was his name? I forget that. I had somebody on my podcast, one of the early guests, who's what you need to read is this novel about a Japanese salaryman's life and how grim it is. And I'm like, that's an interesting recommendation for a book to read. But like all the studies show, right? If you're a founder, you're a leader. If you're a leader, empathy and the ability to understand other people is crucial. Fiction is one of the most highly correlated ways to build empathy. Is if you read fiction, you will tend to be more empathetic. A fiction recommendation or a poetry recommendation, perfectly valid to build the muscle of be creative, think about people.
Well, one thing I will say is that if obviously there's tons and tons of good nonfiction business books out there. The thing is, it, what I find most interesting is finding new ways, new things in it off the beaten track. So if you can find a story structure that you like in, for instance, a book like we just talked about, then that to me has almost more value than if you read 5 other books of people that kind of say the same thing in different words and different approaches. So that is probably not that helpful to most people. But for me, this is something I always just like to see what doesn't fit into this whole thing and how can I do it differently. Not for the sake of doing it differently, but it's very easy to fall into the trap of this is how this works. And that's why I do it that way. And that starts with, how do I write an engaging post on LinkedIn? And you have to follow this blueprint. Or ends with, how do I create a compelling story for my business or a go-to-market strategy or a brand strategy? There's more ways than anyone can count, and you have to find the right one, the one that's right for you. And for me, it's always trying to find something that's off the beaten track. However, since you asked about a business book, one book that I hope I would still like when I read it now, but at the time when I read it, I thought, why has no one ever mentioned this book? And it's called, I think it's just called Business Magic. And let me Google this quickly. I have to.
I'm doing it real quick myself.
Okay, yeah. I think David Morey is the author. And
Creating Business Magic?
who's the author?
I'm looking now.
Blue cover, I think.
David Copper. No, hang on. Eugene Berger.
No.
David Morey,
Yes.
Eugene Berger, and Johnny McLaughlin.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. So that I would definitely recommend.
Oh, this is super interesting. 3 magicians talk. I love this recommendation. Thank you. I'm gonna pick it up myself.
Yeah, you should.
It's to do magic.
And it's an easy read. You can go through it, and it has interesting examples, and it dives into what I am trying to explain very clumsily in certain ways too, where it's like you create this thing out of thin air that wasn't there before, and by doing that, you get the audience's attention, your audience's attention, and when you have their attention, you have a direct connection to their minds and to their hearts. And when you have that, then they will react to what you're doing and create a certain action, and that will create a reality. He doesn't put it that way. They say it differently, and probably other things as well. But I always thought I was surprised that I have not ever seen anyone recommend this book before.
Yeah, I haven't either. That's a great recommendation. I'll be picking it up. I've got 2 books I'm picking up this week. I read about 200 books a year. So I can.
I'm envious. I'm envious.
Don't be. I do it by only sleeping 6 hours a night. Instead, I'll be up on my phone reading in the middle of the night. It's not healthy. It's what I do. Super cool recommendation for you. So I'll give you something in fiction. I've recommended this, I think, twice before on this podcast. But If you want something that plays with the idea of genre and reality, but is written in a more approachable fashion than Infinite Jest, which screw that. Red Shirts by John Scalzi. It plays around the idea of, I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan at all or not. But
anything science fiction.
So in Star Trek, if you're part of the fan base, a red shirt is somebody who's basically on the show for an episode to get killed off. And it is the story of a bunch of red shirts who discover that they're red shirts. And so it's, I can't go into it, I'll spoil the whole story, but it's a really interesting, multi-dimensional, plays with the walls of reality science fiction book that's super easy to read. So I can recommend it highly.
Okay, then now I have another recommendation. See, now that warmed up.
Do it. There we go.
You might have already read it, but it's called Flatland. And it's one of my
Yes.
favorite
Oh,
books ever.
it's like from the
Yeah.
1600s.
Oh,
Right?
it's
That's
super
old.
old. It's super old. And if you read what it is about, then you'd be like, the hell?
A Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin Abbott.
I
There you
love
go.
that book. And but it opens your mind and just makes you realize how there are so many things, how focused you are on the reality that you're living in, basically, and how there's the possibility of other realities that you interact with or overlap with, and you're not even realizing it. And this explanation is not a good one because it makes it sound it is really just what it is, flat land. And it's about flat shapes that live in a flat land. No,
So
like
two-dimensional.
two,
It's about,
yes,
so it is both a story about what it would be like to live in a two-dimensional universe and also a fairly biting critique on Victorian culture.
yes. So exactly. And it's one of my favorite books, definitely.
That's
And
awesome.
if you haven't read it yet, then I definitely, whoever listens to this, recommend go ahead and read it. You can even download it for free
Yeah, it's
on
on
the,
Gutenberg.
yeah, Gutenberg. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I looked it up. It was first published in 1884, so not the 1600s.
Well,
Anyway,
still
super cool.
almost.
Super cool. I love it. I guess I should have realized the 1600s is like Chaucer. We wouldn't be able to read the 1600s because it's Middle English, right? That's not something you and I can parse. Maybe
Well,
you can. It bears a lot of resemblance to Flemish, but
I just have to ask ChatGPT to do it for me.
there you go. There you go. Awesome. I really appreciate the insights you brought. I think a founder who's got questions around visual identity and should it relate to how it should relate to what I want my business to be when it grows up. Definitely check out Christoph. Definitely check out Otherstate. I very much like how you've taken answering these big questions and turned it into let me help clarify how things should look and feel for you. That said, any last thoughts? Do you want to tie the episode up with a bow on a final thing for someone to think about?
We've talked about creating reality and how to create reality, and we could go on and on about all sorts of stuff, but to have a little nugget and a little bow at the end, that is difficult.
I think
man.
my summation of this is, like I tell my children, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're probably right. If you look to the future and interrogate how to get there, whether through a regimented system like Christoph is talking about or through any other way you wish to find, you vastly increase the likelihood that your vision will become a reality. So don't be like those product-led founders who say, branding's all bullshit. I'll worry about it one day when we raise a Series A. Do it now, and you're more likely to raise that Series A than if you don't.
That is beautiful.
Christoph, if
Because
people want to find you online, where do they go look you up?
easy to find me. Just go to otherstate.com. There's probably a link to the LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can find me on X under the handle Krabbit. That's Craabit, or Christoph Haase on LinkedIn. That's probably the.
Why Krabbit? What's Krabbit?
My name is. Let's start this way. When I started to transform the company that I was running into the company of the future, I had a friend who I would just bounce ideas off the wall, talk things through. And at the time, this must have been like 2010-ish or so. He said, you must go and tweet about this. And I wasn't on Twitter at the time. And I said, okay, fine, then let's do that. And we signed up, opened a Twitter account, and I had to come up with a handle, with a name. So my name is Christoph Haase. Haase means rabbit in German. But
there you go.
rabbit, so the real Haase is spelled with one A. My name is spelled with two A's. So I figured I'm rabbit with two A's and put a C in front of it. So it's Krabbit. And then years later, I realized that I misspelled rabbit with two A's because I forgot second B. So it's just Krabbit with one B.
That's excellent.
And it stuck with me ever since, because I probably shouldn't say this here because from now on it's probably not going to work anymore, but it's every platform I've ever signed up for except maybe one, which I can't remember now. This username is free.
Yeah, of course. That's not a. I'm lucky. There are very few Trevor Longinos in the world. There's only one other one that I know of. So I just get Trevor Longino everywhere. And as a result, I've dominated my name on social media because Trevor is Welsh, Longino is Italian. That's not a very common pair.
No, no.
Alrighty, awesome. In that case, everybody, go look up Christoph. I appreciate your time today. This has been a really interesting discussion.
It has
I
been.
hope all the founders who listen into this are inspired to go out and create some reality of their own. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Trevor. It was great.